in Springfield, Missouri. We are interviewing Dale Toney, and the names of the interviewers are Kelly Brueggemann and Brenda Baugh. Okay, how did you get into the Army? Were you drafted or enlisted?
Well, first off, I was in the Air Force.
Oh, the Air Force, sorry.
At the time, I was in college, and my draft number was quite low. And I knew what was happening now. In fact, I went ahead and enlisted. And my second week of basic training got notified that I had missed my calling for the draft. You know, and I had been drafted into the Marine Corps. Thanks, but no thanks. I have a lot of respect for the Marine Corps, but I enjoyed the Air Force. I really did. I spent 20 some odd years in the Air Force. Now, I did basic training, as everybody does in the Air Force, at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. The second week of basic, I knew where I was going to be assigned, because I got interviewed in basic by the photo department there, and knew that as soon as basic was over, I was going to be assigned just across the base into the photo lab. I'd been in photography and I tested on a number of things, and it bypassed all of the photo training, so I went straight in. And from there, I did a number of things there. I have a background in media and a background in photo. I started out as a commercial artist and went back to school and then got drafted. I took a course, was sent to Denver to the photo technical school there in an advanced course. And the last day of the course, the commander of the school says, "We'll see you." And didn't quite understand what he meant. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned back to the photo school, now as an instructor, and was there for a while. And then, due to some other skills, was picked for another. By the way, this was a 3-year controlled tour. You could not be reassigned out of it. Exactly 365 days after starting that 3-year assignment, I was on an airplane headed out to another assignment with the Secretary of the Air Force waiver. You know, I didn't do it. I was pulled for it. It was an intelligence assignment. So I did that for several years. And then completing it, and that whole thing I have to stay out of, was assigned to Reese Air Force Base, which is a pilot training base in Texas, and talking to our MPC person, which is Military Personnel Center in Texas, about assignments. And he said, "Don't unpack. You really don't want to get comfortable there." And he was right, because very shortly thereafter, I was on my way to Vietnam. And there I served as a combat photographer, an aerial combat photographer. And following that, and all of it's fun, and we can talk about it more later, wound up at Syracuse University in a special photojournalism program for the Navy. And it gets involved. But it's basically a master's program in photojournalism where they train very technically. It's very intense training. And after that, you serve as a photojournalist. At that time, the Air Force had one. The two of us that went through the program, we were number 2 and number 3. Since then, they've been averaging about 4 a year. And that's all to qualify for. You know, the competition is quite tough. You know, and it's very hard to keep the job. The average photojournalist probably spends in the field 4 years because it's so intense. You burn out. During my period, I went through several language schools, you know, because I was going to be in an area for some amount of time, so I wanted to know the language. And then did some background study in culture in those areas. Was involved in everything from, well, besides the Vietnam, the return of our POWs. I was in Operation Homecoming, in Hanoi, in Hong Kong. See, there were 2 Americans held by the Chinese, and were released out through Hong Kong. So I was there for that. Operation Baby Lift, when we were pulling refugee babies out of Vietnam. Lost some friends on that when we had one of the C-5s crash from there. Oh, wow. Just going back to think what are some of the other things. I haven't thought about this stuff in years. Did quite a bit on our research and development efforts, but my main thing was to get back to the humanity, the individuals doing their jobs, and what they did off the job. You know, what was of interest. I was also involved in Jonestown in that recovery. So, and after I'll remember things. I was trying to think last night about what it was, and my wife said, "You better be careful." Do you have any specific questions you'd like?
How old were you when you enlisted?
24. 24, right in there.
And you graduated from college?
No.
Oh, you
Not at that time. I finished up my college afterwards.
Oh, okay.
And were you married to your wife then, or did you meet her after?
First wife, yeah.
Okay.
Due to some other things that, in my intolerance on some things, she was the first wife. I didn't like her boyfriends.
That's quite understandable.
And then in fact, I met my wife when I was assigned later to the Defense Information School. This is where we train all of the journalists, all the public affairs people in the Department of Defense. So met her, I was teaching there and met her through various contacts. And then later she went through the school. And she was in Germany and I was there. It was a long distance courtship. About every 6 weeks I'd be able to get to Germany and spend some time over there. And then she was there for a year. So it's one of those things where you really didn't want to change a lot of stuff because of what she was doing. And again, there's some other things there I can't get into because of what she was doing. And she came back and we were both assigned to McConnell Air Force Base in Kansas. And by this time I had gotten out of photojournalism. I was just in charge of an audiovisual center. And so she came there, she got out of the service, went back to school and got her nursing degree. And then when I retired, she came back on active duty as a nurse.
So you two are kind of working next to each other then?
But due to when she was on active duty as a nurse, I had been retired. So now I went from the sponsor, the active duty member, to being the dependent.
Yeah.
It's made it for interesting. In fact, it got real interesting at Vandenberg when she was assigned there. I knew everybody. Most of these people there, the senior people, I had worked with. And I'd known when they were junior in rank. And we'd run into a number of other people in early parts of when we were together that now had moved up in the ranks. In fact, one of them when we knew him was lower rank, but now he was a 2-star general and in charge. And we were in base housing, and the general would come over in his car and he'd park. There in the military, you only park on one side of the street. Everything has rules. That we always had a lane of traffic for emergency vehicles or whatever. Well, he'd pull his car up right in front of the house, which was the no parking sign. Had a real young captain next door that came running over and he says, hey chief, better tell the general, he better move his car. He might get a ticket. I said, no, Captain, he won't get a ticket. I guarantee you, he won't get a ticket. But we would get mail for Captain Toney. Now, my wife was a captain. Captain Toney, USN. And it would be addressed to me and not to my wife. Because of who we hung around with and what we were doing on the base. I said, well, it's got to be Navy. So she kept saying, I'm the captain, he's the retiree. Which made it for fun.
Well, I guess we can get into your experiences in Vietnam.
Okay, like I said, I was a combat photographer, an aerial combat I worked with, you name it, I would get involved in it.
What exactly does that entail, being a combat?
Well, first off, I'm air crew. I'm
Okay.
trained as an air crewman. But I also went through a number of schools. I'm also a parachutist.
Oh, really?
And I'm also trained in air assault, repelling out of helicopters. And these aren't normal skills you run into. Not all your photojournals have those. I spend a lot of time with the Vietnamese and with the Thais in the Thai border guard. I would go out, I went out on patrol, a number of patrols with the Marines, patrols with the Army, on the ground. Flew all over, just about every base we had in Vietnam, and fire base. Most of those I've been to. Involved a number of firefights. I kept thinking, I'm Air Force, what am I doing here? But we got the pictures, that's what counted.
So were you just taking pictures for, maybe just for like historical reasons, or?
Well, they were for release,
Oh, okay.
for news. In Saigon, they would have meetings with the credentialed press, and they'd pass out photographs.
Oh, okay.
And unfortunately, a lot of them were slugged by that particular journalist or that organization as their own. So, military combat photographer very seldom got credit for his work. And I'll say some other things, but not with the tape brothers.
And what years were you there? Or
Oh, I was in and out over a period of 4 different years. Did my tours there, but I'd also go in and out, during the special project.
What type of interaction did you have with the civilians, with the Vietnamese and Thai?
Oh, I would go out on a lot of them, right out into the villages. When we would go out, like with the Thai, we'd go out in what we call civic actions. Same with the Vietnamese. You go out with a medical group, and they would take care of medical needs within the village. They would go out, and there were numbers of groups of GIs that go out and build schools in villages. So a lot of what you saw and what you see now in the documentaries of Vietnam doesn't really portray what was going on.
Do you think it doctors it up a little bit, or makes it look worse?
I think it takes it from a perspective that it doesn't take in the individual.
Okay.
It lost that. It's always broad brush.
Yeah.
And it's always whatever people would react to. You hear, you hear about villages being burned. What they don't tell you is that the reason that village may have been burned was you just had a patrol that was shot at through it. And you could see the muzzle flashes coming out of the huts. So what do?
Yeah.
You return fire.
Yeah.
But see, that part is left out of a lot of it. Now, in war, no matter what, you're going to have collateral damage. You're going to have damage that we wouldn't in a thinking, when we have time to look back on them, we wouldn't be involved in. But when you have milliseconds to make decisions, you make those decisions. Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. I took great issue with a lot of things that were going on as far as people saying, well, we got to do this, we should do this, we can't do that, and had no idea what was going on, had no experience with it.
So do you feel like you dealt with a lot of people that didn't have experience?
No, what I'm saying is when I came back after the last tour, and to hear, between tours, before the war was over, I was at the Pentagon, and a lot of the protest operations there, people that were protesting something they knew nothing about, and accusing the military member of being, the baby killer, you're undoing something unlawful, whatever. How can you do that? Tell me that when you've been there.
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember something about the military. It is not a democratic society. It is not a democratic organization. You take, as an individual, you take a moral and legal obligation to subject yourself to authority. And the person above you has taken that same oath, and it has those moral and legal obligations to subject themselves to authority. It is not, we're going to vote on this. But this non-democratic organization is necessary to protect a democratic society. So you take an oath, and you take that oath very seriously. It's probably one of the shortest oaths you ever take in the military, and when you go in. It's very, very similar to the same oath that the President of the United States takes. You will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and follow those orders issued to you, those lawful orders given to you by those in authority over you. It's very simple. But with it has tremendous ramifications. You give up a lot of personal freedoms, but it's all by choice. Now, that's one thing about the Air Force that was nice. It's the only service that is never drafted. In Vietnam, Navy, Marine Corps, and Army were all drafted in the Air Force. It had waiting lists. So we were there because we wanted to be. And we were also the Office of Primary Responsibility for Audiovisual. So that's why we were able to go into the other services. I loved it. I enjoyed it. 20 years went by like that.
Really?
Yeah. When you look at it from the other side of it, you don't think you could ever do it. But you look at, what am I going to be doing in 20 years? Because I'm going to be, so you're going to be around in 20 years. So what do you want to be doing in 20 years? What do you want to have as far as credentials, training, whatever, at the end of that 20 years? You make those decisions on this side of it. Because you're going to wake up someday, 20 years later, and you never want to wake up wondering, what if?
Do you feel you were properly prepared to go, or
To
is there
war?
To war?
No one is ever properly prepared to go to war.
What was the
And no one ever should be. Here's the thing about a military person you'll find. They are the people that are most opposed to any war because they know what the war costs. And they know how much hell war really is. Persons that don't, and a lot of them think they do, don't know. That's why you find the military, professional military, very much opposed to war. But if that is what we have to do, then let the military do the job. So train for it, equip for it, and let them go. Too many times in Vietnam, the war was being fought from the United States, not from the theater.
So I guess you did see a lot of combat then?
Yes. And it's still sometimes very, very hard to deal with.
So when you came back from war, did you have a lot of, like, I know a lot of soldiers say that they had a lot of nightmares and night sweats and stuff like
Post-traumatic, not really. There are certain things you just sort of put them in their compartment and you deal with them as you need to. And I had some buddies that they never, ever were able to deal with it. And they had tremendous problems. Now, my background's in psychology, so I'm a little bit different than a lot of them. So, but it was 10 years before I ever go to a war picture.
Really?
Yeah, just because you had not really worked through it yet. It was an interesting ordeal. I wouldn't recommend it for my worst enemy.
Do you feel like the military has done a good job of getting psychological help for?
They do their best.
I mean,
they really do. They do a very good job at it.
I know it's come a long way since then.
But see, we learned a lot of good lessons in Vietnam. And psychiatrists come a long way too.
Mm-hmm.
But we're more sensitive to the needs. We've learned some lessons the hard way too. Yeah. But I'd say right now the American soldier is probably better prepared for, in, and after war than any other time.
Yeah.
Were you able to stay in touch with your family while you were?
Oh yeah, very much so. Of course, at that time we didn't have the internet. We couldn't do email and stuff. It was usually by mail, and that was always, my biggest problem was me slowing down long enough to get my mail.
Yeah.
But there was always provisions for that too. I had a home station, and our units kept track. They would, they'd let me know, you got a lot of this. And I'd come through, pick up, and go out. So, but I pretty much traveled in the theater as a single person. I wasn't a unit. I was a member of a unit, but I would go wherever the stories were.
So you did most of your work by yourself?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it. Then I would also team up with a motion picture team or with an operation and do it. See, the photojournalists in the Air Force, we had what we call Class 1 orders. Unless there was a physical reason that our presence would jeopardize the mission, we were authorized to be there. And a lot of our stuff was classified. We could go into the National Archives and go through the normal declassification system, but it would be there, it would be part of history. We found out that we had big lapses in our history of the military in action, like in Korea and stuff, where they restricted. You run into a lot of no unauthorized photography. They forgot to tell everybody that there was authorized photography and good photography, real photography. You don't fight war in starched uniforms. There's a lot of PR stuff was being done. Our job was to go in and show it as it really was. And that stuff went to the archives. A lot of it was released too.
So was Vietnam kind of the first for all of this? Because you said in Korea there was big gaps.
Well, I went and looked at the stuff before I went over. I looked at a lot of stuff, and I saw a lot of the starched uniform, a lot of the things. It wasn't believable. It wasn't real. And the American audience is a very, very sophisticated audience. They recognize what's put up. So,
what do you think some of your most memorable, best experiences were? This would be a lot of fun.
yeah. The funny thing is, they didn't involve any of the, and I got to do a lot of great photography in a number of places, but one that strikes me most is in upstate New York, doing a series of pictures on MASS. This is Military Assistance to Safety in Traffic. This is where we'd have, like Plattsburgh, New York, where you've got very isolated things. Well, let's say that there's somebody's in trouble being injured, and you can't get anything to them. Well, the military has helicopters up there, and pararescuemen. These are very highly trained medical people. They're also jumpers. They're not your normal paramedics.
Yeah.
Well, they can ask for assistance, and they'll send these out to them. Well, one of the stories, I was up there on Thanksgiving Day, and the commander of the unit, we were all going to have Thanksgiving dinner at his house. His wife had it all fixed up. And I remember just making the comment to it, wouldn't it be funny if the beepers went off about now? Beep, 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 beep. So, and it happened to be that the crew that was on call, because they stood alert for it, was all there, and we all looked at each other, and off we went. And it was a woman had gone into premature labor, and was at one of these hospitals and it was snowing. Nothing was moving, and we had a meeting. Do we fly or don't we fly? Because it took a waiver. This was a no-fly condition, and everybody had to volunteer, and they had to get a waiver for that helicopter to launch. And the consensus was, are we needed? Yes. Yes, we go. Launched to the hospital. By this time, they had found the father. And one of the pictures is him standing, and they delivered the baby, and the baby had to be transported to Vermont to a neonatal unit. That's why we were there. And he's standing there, and one of the pictures is him and his wife looking at that thing, and the bullets. He was out deer hunting, still in the back pocket. You know, he was, still mud on him from when they got it, because they got word to him. Anyway, we transported the baby. He was okay, but those were, that particular job stands out. I loved it. And it just turns out he was a private in the Army, home on leave.
Oh.
Everything just fell into place real well.
How difficult was it with your wife being in the military too?
I didn't find any difficult. No. She understood what I was going through, and I understood what she was doing. It's a different mindset. And if you try to explain it, it's hard to explain. It's almost like any other job. Every job has, certain parameters you work within. Well, the military does too. So you just learn to work within those parameters. And it's not one of these things where you're a second-class citizen either. You have all the same things as regular. You just have a different legal system. So you're under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is more defined than a lot of civil law. So, we like it. And I enjoyed it.
You said that you were so busy, it was always rush. Did you guys ever really have time to relax in getting in downtime?
Oh yeah, you made downtime. In fact, that's sort of why we wound up in Northview. With the jobs that we had, it was like being in a pressure cooker at times. The wife and I always made it a point that every month or 6 weeks at the latest, we'd take off. Just take off for a while, a weekend, to get away from all of it and just relax and enjoy each other. Well, the place we found in Northview was prettier, nicer than some of the places we'd taken off to. We fell in love with it the moment we set foot up. In fact, we'd been, like I said, we were looking for a place for about 2 years. And we were down one Sunday afternoon, and the real estate agent we were working with said, she said, "I got one more place. I talked to him last night. It's not listed yet." And I'm looking, I've heard this before. And she said, "But, we had criteria for it. We wanted trees. We wanted a pond. We wanted some acreage, and it had to be near a highway, and we had to be able to afford it." And my wife said, "And it's got to have a sidewalk." Well, she says, "I've got most of your criteria, and it's got to be close to town." And so when we go to look at, we were, it's a 3-hour drive. She says, "Okay, we'll look at one more place." And as we walked onto the place, the real estate agent staying on the sidewalk, but this way, I said, "And it's got a sidewalk. It's got a sidewalk." Anyway, we fell in love with it. We made an offer. We didn't think we had a snowball's chance of being taken up on it. And they made the offer to the couple at 7 o'clock, and at 7:05 they called us and told us that they hadn't accepted it. So, and the rest is history. And my daughter's been in the Marshfield system ever since. So,
Do you just have one girl, or how many
she's
children?
the youngest. I have 4 altogether.
And are any of your children in the military?
No,
No.
none of them have. Now, they married military.
Really?
Yeah, I have a set of twin daughters. Both of them married military guys.
Oh.
And my oldest son has not been in the military at all. Let's leave it there. He's been involved in the intelligence community.
Oh, okay. Enough said. Do you feel like while you were in Vietnam, do you feel like you always had plenty of supplies and?
Yeah, no problem.
And I know that like a lot of the people who were in combat, they never really had the chance to eat that very much. I guess they were always in the front. Did you?
Oh, okay.
What was the food like?
Yeah.
Oh, the food was outstanding.
Really?
Yeah, when you had a chance.
Exactly.
Yeah, the military takes care of its own very well, but when you're out in the field, you carry it with you. And there are times when you just cannot. It's hard to say, "Okay, guys, stop. We're going to eat now."
Yeah, yeah, really.
Yeah. No, but supplies, we had no problems with supplies. Now, there were certain things we may have wanted, but they weren't available. You could always want things.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you've read and what you've seen sometimes may have a little bit of difference.
Mm. Were you there during any holidays?
Oh, yeah.
Like major holidays? Did everyone like kind of stick together and make kind of like family during the holidays?
It was family. Military is family. It's a very special camaraderie. Yeah, Christmases were lonely when you were there. But I've spent Christmases in Antarctica too. So, and you have that same camaraderie. You bond. One of the biggest audiences for certain television shows, well, only one in particular, MASH, because MASH hit it right on the head, and you saw that camaraderie in that was there. But you did crazy things in combat to keep from going crazy, and that's why I like MASH. You served with everybody you saw there.
Yeah. Do you still keep in touch with anyone that you were?
Occasionally, and most of them there were other photojournalists. In fact, I just a couple of years ago went to a reunion for all the military photojournalists that are still living. So.
Do you have any desire to go back and see anything that you
No.
by Vietnam?
Oh, I'd love to go back to Vietnam.
Oh, really?
Oh man, that's one of the most beautiful places on earth.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, you can remember that was a French resort.
Yeah, that's true.
Remember, it was French Indochina.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a beautiful country, beautiful people, some of the warmest people you can run into. Unfortunately, it was marred by war.
Yeah. Do you have any experiences that you can think of in Vietnam that you'd like to share?
No.
No? None with like the civilians, like nothing like little significant stuff. But...
Well, like I said, so much of it, you gotta remember how long ago it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I enjoyed when I would go out into the villages and meeting the people when it was not a combat type situation. Very warm, very hospitable. Just two different cultures, ours and theirs, and bridging that gap.
And you knew how to speak their language,
A little
correct?
bit, yeah, a little bit Vietnamese.
Did they know any English? The way they came?
Not where we were going. They were more concerned on where was the next meal coming from, rather than who was in charge.
They were always very welcoming. And
Very, very open. When you were out of the political side, when you were out of the combat side.
So when you finally decided that it was time for you to go home, I mean, do you remember that day?
Yeah, I missed my going away party.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember the last tour, and I was leaving. My original plane was going to be leaving on Thursday, and due to various things, that flight got moved to a Tuesday. My going away party was on Wednesday. I left on Tuesday.
Oh no.
So, I didn't mind. It was just one of those little things you go, hey, that'll make a funny story someday.
Yeah. Was your family there to greet you whenever you?
When I landed,
Yeah.
they were there.
Was there like a lot of people there? Like you imagine, you know?
No, that's the big difference between Vietnam and other wars. We came back as individuals, not as units. The only time we really saw crowds was when big things came in, like the returning POWs. That's when you'd have a group coming in. No, we would ship individually and come back individually. There was no parades, no bands. So, and most of the time you didn't really let on you were GI.
Were there protesters there, or?
Oh yeah, I saw more protesters than anything else.
Do you think that?
Literally, to walk down the street, if you were in uniform, you'd be spit on. Now, that can cause for some pretty bitter feelings too.
That's everything you went through, yeah.
Do you think that was partly led on by how you said they portrayed it differently than it was? Do you
A
think
lot
that
have to do with it.
has to do with it?
Remember, this
Yeah.
is the first war in history that you saw at supper time every day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And you said you did attend a reunion for
Mhm.
everyone?
Yeah, this is just for the photojournalists from
Oh.
all the services. Yeah.
How many were there? How many photojournalists were there?
74. And plus a bunch of other people who were interested in the field and clever. There were 74 that held the credential of
Okay.
photojournalist.
So then after you were finished, you continued with your photography, or did you?
Actually, no, I didn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah. After I retired, I went to work for a company